A veteran Navy SEAL and his dog stopped by a forest creek that felt too perfect to be real. The water was clear. The air was still, like the world had paused just for them. Then the dog froze. Not a sound, not a step, just a stare locked onto a patch of earth no one else would notice. At first it looked like nothing, but something about it felt wrong. Too smooth, too shaped, like the forest was hiding something. The dog moved forward and began to dig. And what rose from beneath the soil was not just metal. It was a buried tank, waiting. Before we begin, tell me where you're watching from, and don't forget to like and subscribe to Veteran Dog Stories. The road had no destination. It never did. Gideon Rourke drove like a man who understood that staying still was more dangerous than moving. The old pickup truck beneath his hands rattled over uneven gravel, its engine humming with a tired persistence that mirrored the man behind the wheel. He did not play music. He did not speak. The silence suited him. It always had. He was 43 years old, built like someone who had spent years turning his body into a tool and never quite learned how to turn it back. Broad shoulders pressed against the worn seat. His olive field jacket carried the faint creases of long use, the fabric softened by weather, by time, by things it had never been meant to protect against. Beneath it, the red and dark blue plaid shirt added a quiet warmth to an otherwise utilitarian silhouette. His hands rested steady on the wheel, scarred, strong, precise. His face was carved rather than shaped, angular jaw, light stubble tracing along the edges like something unfinished. His eyes, gray-blue and steady, rarely lingered on anything longer than necessary, but when they did, they seemed to see through layers others missed. A man like that didn't look for trouble. Trouble simply recognized him. In the passenger seat sat the only companion he trusted, Vex. The German Shepherd K9 didn't move much, but stillness was never the same as rest. About 5 or 6 years old, Vex carried the controlled strength of a trained working dog. His coat was black along the spine, fading into warm gold along his chest and legs, short and dense like armor built by nature. Every muscle beneath that coat held tension, not nervousness, but readiness. His amber eyes watched the road, the trees, the shifting light, always calculating something beyond human awareness. There was a patch on his black tactical harness. K9 Vex. He had earned it. Twice overseas, Vex had stopped Gideon from stepping into death. Once from a buried explosive, once from a sniper hidden where no human eye could have found him in time. Since then, Gideon never questioned him. Not once. The forest began long before the road ended. Tall pines rose on either side, their trunks straight and pale, stretching upward like cathedral pillars. Sunlight filtered through them in soft golden threads, painting the ground in shifting patterns. It should have felt peaceful. It did not. Not to Gideon. He adjusted his grip slightly, eyes flicking toward the dashboard. The temperature gauge had crept higher than it should. Not dangerously high, but enough. "Yeah," he muttered under his breath, voice rough from lack of use. "I see it." The truck coughed once, then settled. He slowed, scanning the road ahead. There was no town nearby, no gas station, just forest. Always forest. He pulled the truck onto a narrow patch of dirt beside the road and killed the engine. The sudden silence pressed in. Not empty, but full of wind, distant birds, the quiet breathing of trees. Vex didn't wait for a command. The dog stepped down from the truck in one smooth motion, paws landing softly on the ground. His ears lifted, turning slightly as if catching a sound Gideon couldn't hear. Gideon leaned back for a moment, exhaling slowly. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small, worn metal tag. It hung from a thin chain, dulled with age. He didn't open it. He never did. His thumb brushed across its surface. Then he slid it back into his pocket as if the act itself had weight. "Just cooling down," he said quietly, though whether he meant the truck or himself wasn't entirely clear. Vex had already moved. The dog wasn't wandering. He wasn't exploring. He was following something. Gideon noticed immediately. His posture changed, not visibly to most, but inside, something sharpened. "Hey," he called softly. "Stay close." Vex didn't disobey. But he didn't stop either. Instead, he turned his head slightly, just enough for Gideon to see his eyes, then continued forward, off the road, into the trees. That was new. Gideon stepped out of the truck and followed. The forest floor was soft beneath his boots, layered with pine needles and patches of moss. The air cooled as he moved deeper, carrying the scent of sap and damp earth. The road disappeared behind him within seconds, swallowed by the trees. Vex moved with purpose, not fast, not rushed, but deliberate. And then the sound reached him. Water. At first it was faint, just a whisper beneath the wind. Then it grew clearer, steady, rhythmic, like something alive. Gideon pushed past a cluster of low branches and stepped into a clearing. The creek lay before him. It wasn't large, but it didn't need to be. The water ran clear over smooth stones, catching the sunlight in shifting reflections that danced across the surface. Moss-covered rocks lined the edges, and the light filtering through the trees gave everything a soft, almost unreal glow. For a moment, just a moment, Gideon stood still. This was different. Not quiet like the absence of noise, quiet like something whole. Vex stepped down toward the water, lowering his head to drink, then lifting it again almost immediately. Not thirsty, just checking. Gideon walked closer, crouching by the edge. He dipped his fingers into the water. Cold, clean. He let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. "All right," he said after a moment. "We'll stay." The words felt strange. He didn't stay, not anywhere. But something about this place, it didn't feel temporary. The afternoon passed slowly. Gideon set up a simple camp near the creek. No fire at first. Just a small clearing, his pack, the truck within walking distance. He moved through the motions automatically, practiced, efficient. There was comfort in routine. It left less room for memory. Vex stayed nearby, never far, occasionally circling the area, scanning, always aware. At one point, Gideon caught himself watching the dog. "You ever get tired?" he asked quietly. Vex didn't respond. He never needed to. Gideon leaned back against a tree, eyes half closed, listening to the water. The forest felt lighter here, as if whatever weight he carried couldn't quite settle. He almost slept. Then Vex stopped. Not slowed. Stopped. Gideon's eyes opened instantly. The dog stood about 20 feet away, body rigid, ears forward, head slightly lowered. His gaze fixed on something beyond the immediate clearing. No barking, no growling, just stillness. Gideon rose slowly. "What is it?" he asked, voice low. Vex didn't move. He didn't look back. He only stared. Gideon followed his line of sight. At first he saw nothing unusual, just a small rise in the earth, covered in thick moss and tangled roots. Leaves layered over it from years of falling, forming a soft, natural mound. except it wasn't natural. Not quite. The shape was wrong. Too round, too even. Gideon took a step closer. Vex shifted slightly, moving ahead, then stopping again, as if waiting. The man crouched beside the mound, his hand brushing across the moss. It felt damp, cool beneath his fingers. He pressed lightly. Firm, too firm. Vex lowered his head and began to scratch, not aggressively, not like digging for prey, but with careful, focused intent. Chunks of moss peeled away, dark soil followed. And then, a dull, rusted surface emerged beneath. Gideon froze. Metal. He brushed away more dirt, his movements slower now, more deliberate. The shape beneath the earth curved outward, solid, heavy. Not debris, not scrap. Something built, something buried. Vex stepped back slightly, watching him. Not curious, not excited. Waiting. Gideon's fingers hovered just above the exposed steel. Cold. Even through the warmth of the day, the metal held a chill that didn't belong. He didn't touch it yet. Didn't need to. He already knew. This wasn't something the forest had grown over by accident. This was something the forest had been asked to forget. Vex didn't look like he had discovered something. He looked like he had returned to it. Like this place, this exact spot, had been waiting. And somehow, it had known he would come. Gideon finally placed his hand against the metal. The cold ran through his palm, up his arm, settling somewhere deep in his chest where old memories lived. He exhaled slowly. Well, he muttered under his breath. That's not supposed to be here. The creek behind him continued to flow, untouched, unchanged. But something in the forest had shifted. Not loudly, not visibly. Just enough for a man who had spent his life listening for danger to feel it. Gideon stood, brushing dirt from his hands, eyes scanning the mound again, this time not as part of the landscape, but as something hidden within it. He looked down at Vex. The dog met his gaze, calm, steady. No fear, no hesitation, just certainty. Gideon gave a small nod. Yeah, he said quietly. I see it too. The sun dipped lower, casting longer shadows across the clearing. The golden light softened, turning the creek into a ribbon of quiet fire between the stones. Beautiful. Too beautiful. Gideon had seen places like this before. Not the same, never the same, but places where something felt off, where the quiet was too complete, where the world seemed to hold its breath. He had learned not to ignore that feeling. He picked up his shovel, not quickly, not urgently, just inevitably. Behind him, the water kept moving, as if time itself refused to stop. But beneath the moss, beneath the roots, beneath decades of silence, something waited. And for the first time in a long while, Gideon Rourke wasn't moving on. Gideon Rourke did not sleep that night. It wasn't fear. Fear had a rhythm, sharp, fast, loud in the chest. This was quieter, familiar. The kind of unease that didn't rush you, but settled in slowly, like something taking a seat across from you and waiting. The creek whispered through the dark, steady and unchanged. The same sound that had almost lulled him into rest earlier now seemed to mark time. Each second passed with a quiet certainty that something beneath the forest had already begun to shift. Gideon lay on his back, staring up through the thin gaps in the canopy where fragments of night sky showed between the branches. His jacket was pulled tight against the cold. One hand rested near the knife at his side. Not out of panic, but out of habit. Across from him, Vex lay on the ground, head lowered but not asleep. The German shepherd's ears twitched occasionally, catching sounds that Gideon could not hear. Every few minutes, the dog would lift his head slightly, scan the darkness, then settle again without fully relaxing. "Yeah," Gideon murmured quietly, voice almost lost to the wind. "You feel it too." Vex didn't respond. He didn't need to. The man turned his head slightly, looking toward where the mound sat beyond the edge of the clearing. He couldn't see it from here, but he didn't have to. The shape of it had already settled into his mind. Too symmetrical, too deliberate, too wrong. His fingers brushed unconsciously against the pocket of his jacket where the metal tag rested. He didn't take it out. He never did at night. Instead, he closed his eyes, not to sleep, but to wait. Morning came slowly. Mist hovered low over the creek, drifting in thin layers between the trees. The sunlight hadn't yet broken fully through, leaving the forest in a soft gray-blue haze that made everything feel distant, almost unreal. Gideon was already on his feet. He moved with quiet efficiency, packing away what little gear he had taken out, checking his equipment without needing to think about it. The shovel, folding and trenching tool, clicked open in his hands. The knife slid easily from its sheath. A small brush from his pack completed the set. Vex stood nearby, watching. No wagging tail, no restless pacing, just attention. "All right," Gideon said, glancing toward the trees. "Let's go see what we missed." The dog turned immediately, already moving toward the mound, as if he had been waiting for those words. The forest felt different in the morning. Not darker, not more dangerous, but more honest. The shadows that had hidden shapes the night before were gone now. Everything was visible. The roots, the moss, the uneven ground. And yet the mound stood out even more clearly. Gideon approached it slowly. Now that he knew what he was looking at, the illusion was gone. This wasn't a natural rise in the earth. It was something built, buried, and left behind. He drove the shovel into the soil. The sound was dull, heavy. The earth gave way in layers. Soft moss first, then damp soil, then thicker roots that resisted the blade. Gideon worked carefully, cutting where needed, pulling rather than tearing. He didn't rush. Rushing damaged things. And whatever this was, it mattered. Vex circled, not randomly. The dog moved in wide arcs around the mound, nose low, inhaling deeply, then pausing, then moving again. Once he stopped at a point to the left of Gideon, scratching briefly before stepping back, as if reconsidering. Gideon noticed. "You're not sure," he muttered. It was the first time since they'd arrived that Vex had shown hesitation. That meant something. The man continued digging. Minutes stretched into an hour. Sweat began to form beneath his jacket despite the cool air. His hands moved steadily, clearing away the earth inch by inch. Then, the shovel struck something solid. A different sound this time, sharper. Gideon froze. He set the shovel aside and dropped to one knee, brushing away the dirt with his hands. The metal beneath was thick, curved, its surface eaten by rust but still intact beneath the decay. He cleared more. The shape extended, longer than expected, wider. Then slowly, another form began to appear beside it. Parallel. Gideon leaned back slightly, studying what was emerging. Two cylindrical structures, massive. He exhaled. "That's not right," he said quietly. He cleared more dirt, revealing the base where the cylinders connected to something larger. The curvature beneath suggested a rotating structure, a turret. Not just metal, not just debris, a machine. and not a small one. Gideon had seen armored vehicles before, driven them, walked beside them in places where the ground shook with their weight. But this was different. The scale was wrong. The proportions felt excessive. He stood slowly, stepping back to take in what little was visible. The mound was no longer just a mound. It was a shell, hiding something far larger beneath the ground. Vex stopped circling. The dog stood near the rear of the structure now, body angled slightly, nose lifted. Then he moved again, this time directly to a spot behind the exposed metal. He lowered his head, sniffed, paused, sniffed again, then scratched. Once, twice, stopped. Gideon walked over. The soil here was different, more compact, as if it had been pressed down intentionally. He drove the shovel in again. The blade sank with resistance, then hit something. Not as thick as the armor, but still metal. He dropped to his knees, clearing the dirt with his hands until a cylindrical object emerged. About 2 feet long, sealed, weathered but intact. Gideon stared at it for a moment. "Storage tube," he said under his breath. "Military, no doubt." He twisted the cap. At first it didn't move. The seal had held for decades. But with a steady pressure it gave way with a faint crack. Inside, paper, rolled tightly, a small notebook bound in dark leather. Gideon pulled them out carefully. The first sheet was a map, not civilian. Grid lines, elevation marks, coordinates, precision. The second, handwritten notes. Most of the ink had faded, but some words remained. Vex sat beside him now, watching, not curious, waiting. Gideon unrolled the paper further. The words stood out immediately. Cerberus, he frowned. Another line below it. Unstable. Then, further down, do not recover. Gideon's jaw tightened slightly. He glanced back at the exposed metal behind him, then at the map in his hands. "This wasn't lost," he said quietly. Vex's ears twitched. Gideon looked down at the notebook next. He opened it carefully. Most of the pages were damaged, ink blurred, paper fragile. But a few entries remained legible. Dates, coordinates, technical notes that meant little without context. But one thing was clear. This had been recorded, planned, documented, and then buried. Vex suddenly stood, not abruptly, not aggressively, but with a slow, deliberate motion that made Gideon look up immediately. The dog's head turned, not toward the mound, not toward the trees, but toward the creek. His ears tilted forward. His body stiffened just enough to notice. For a brief moment, Gideon felt something shift again. Not in the ground, not in the air, but in the quiet, as if the forest itself had just listened. Then Vex blinked, the tension easing slightly, and looked back at Gideon. The moment passed, but the feeling didn't. Gideon closed the notebook slowly. He slid the papers back into the tube, sealing it carefully. Then he stood, turning back toward the mound. Now that he knew what he was looking at, the shape was undeniable. The symmetry, the scale, the deliberate burial. He wiped his hands against his pants, eyes narrowing slightly. "Someone put you here," he said under his breath. Not abandoned, not forgotten, placed. He looked around the clearing. The trees stood tall and indifferent. The creek continued to flow, unchanged. Birds moved through the branches as if nothing beneath the earth mattered. But Gideon knew better. He had seen places like this before, places where something had gone wrong, places where the ground held more than it should. He glanced at Vex. The dog met his gaze, calm, steady, no fear, no hesitation, just that same quiet certainty. Gideon gave a small nod. "All right," he said. "We don't guess." He picked up the shovel again. "We find out." The sun rose higher, burning away the last of the mist. Light poured into the clearing, illuminating the exposed steel beneath the earth. What had been hidden for decades was beginning to take shape. And whatever it was, it had not been meant to be found. By late morning, the forest no longer felt like a place to stay. It felt like a place that watched. Gideon Rourke stood beside the exposed steel, shovel resting against his shoulder, eyes fixed on the partially unearthed structure. The sunlight now reached deeper into the clearing, illuminating more of what had been hidden beneath the moss. It didn't make it less unsettling. It made it clearer. And clarity came with weight. He had seen enough. Not everything, but enough to understand that this wasn't something he could leave buried again. Not without knowing what it was, who had put it there, and why it had been meant to stay forgotten. He sealed the storage tube, wiped the last of the dirt from his hands, and looked down at Vex. "We're taking a drive," he said. The dog stood immediately. No hesitation. The road into Briar Glen curved like it had no intention of being found. The forest didn't end. It simply thinned enough to allow a road, a handful of buildings, and the illusion of civilization. The town appeared gradually, not all at once. A gas station with a faded sign, a diner with chipped paint and a handwritten menu taped to the window, a general store that looked older than the road itself. Gideon parked near the edge of town, engine finely cooled, the faint ticking sound of metal settling echoing under the hood. Vex remained in the passenger seat, watching. People walked past, slow, unhurried, the way people moved in places that had forgotten what urgency felt like. A couple glanced toward the truck, eyes lingering just long enough to register the dog, the man, the quiet tension around them. Gideon stepped out, adjusting his jacket. "Stay," he said. Vex obeyed. But his eyes followed, always. The building Gideon was looking for sat slightly apart from the others. A modest brick structure with a small metal plaque near the door. Voss Engineering and Survey. Retired. The word retired had been added later, the lettering slightly uneven, as if it hadn't originally been part of the story. Gideon pushed the door open. The bell above it rang softly. Inside, the air smelled like dust and oil. Old paper and metal that had been handled too many times and then left alone for too long. Maps lined the walls, some framed, others pinned directly onto corkboards. Many of them were yellowed with age, their edges curling slightly. Behind a wooden desk sat a man who looked like he had outlived most of the things in the room. Milton Voss, 79 years old, thin, almost fragile, but not weak. His body had folded inward with age, shoulders slightly hunched, but there was still something rigid in the way he held himself. His hands rested on the desk, veins visible beneath pale skin, fingers long and precise. Engineer's hands, hands that had once built things. His hair was completely white, cut short, practical. A pair of thin-framed glasses sat low on his nose, and when he looked up, his eyes were sharp in a way that didn't belong to someone who had retired from anything important. He had seen things, and more importantly, he remembered them. "You lost?" Milton asked, voice dry, not unfriendly, but not welcoming either. Gideon shook his head. "No, sir." He stepped forward slowly and placed the metal storage tube on the desk. Milton's eyes moved to it immediately. Not curious, not confused, recognizing. That was the first sign. Gideon didn't say anything else. He didn't need to. Milton reached out, hesitated for just a fraction of a second, then unscrewed the cap. The papers slid out. The old man's fingers froze. For a moment, nothing in the room moved. Not the air, not the light, not even the faint creak of the building settling. Milton didn't blink. His eyes traced the markings, the faded ink, the grid lines on the map. Then something changed. Not visibly to most people. But Gideon saw it. The man's breathing shifted. Slower, heavier. "Where did you find this?" Milton asked. The question came out quieter than before. Gideon crossed his arms. "In the woods," he said simply. Milton's gaze lifted. "Which woods?" Gideon nodded toward one of the maps on the wall. North Ridge, past the creek lines, about 15 miles out. Milton didn't look at the map. He didn't need to. He already knew. Silence stretched between them. Then the old man rolled the paper carefully and slid it back into the tube as if putting something dangerous back into its cage. "You should put that back," he said. Gideon didn't move. "Why?" Milton leaned back slowly in his chair, studying him. "You're not from around here." "No." "You military?" It wasn't a question. Gideon gave a small nod. Milton's eyes shifted slightly, noting the boots, the posture, the way Gideon stood, not relaxed, not tense, but ready. "You stand like someone who's been shot at," the old man muttered. Gideon almost smiled. Milton exhaled, long and slow. Then he turned his chair slightly, looking toward the window, as if the answer wasn't in the room, but somewhere outside it. "That land," he began, voice quieter now, "wasn't always public." Gideon listened. Back in the early 60s, that whole section was federal property, restricted. Not on maps like these. He tapped the desk lightly. Not on anything civilians were meant to see. "For what?" Gideon asked. Milton's fingers tightened slightly. "For testing." "What kind?" The old man hesitated. Then slowly, "Things that weren't supposed to fail." Gideon's jaw shifted. Milton continued. "They were working on a system designed to break underground structures, hardened bunkers, facilities buried deep enough that nothing conventional could reach them." Gideon thought of the metal beneath the earth, the scale, the shape. "That thing out there," Milton said quietly, "wasn't just a vehicle." Gideon didn't interrupt. "It was a prototype." Milton's hand, resting on the desk, began to tremble. Not slightly. Not from age, from memory. His fingers curled slowly, as if gripping something invisible, something that wasn't there anymore, but had been once. His eyes weren't in the room. They were somewhere else, somewhere buried. "I thought," he whispered, barely audible. "I thought we buried it deep enough." The moment passed. Milton straightened slightly, the tremor fading as quickly as it had come. He adjusted his glasses, reclaiming control. Gideon didn't look away. "What happened?" he asked. Milton didn't answer immediately. Instead, he reached for a drawer, pulled it open, then closed it again without taking anything out. A habit, a hesitation. "They pushed it too far," he said finally. "The system wasn't stable. Some of the engineers knew it. They said it wasn't ready." "And?" Milton's expression hardened. "They ran the test anyway." Gideon felt something cold settle in his chest. "What kind of failure?" he asked. The old man's eyes met his. "The kind that doesn't leave survivors where it happens." Silence. Gideon didn't ask the next question right away. He already knew the answer would matter. "How many?" Milton's gaze didn't waver. 37. The number hung in the air like something heavy enough to bend it. Gideon glanced briefly toward the window where the trees of the forest stood in quiet indifference. Engineers, Milton continued. Technicians, soldiers, all in the same place when it collapsed. Gideon's voice dropped slightly. And they just buried it? Milton nodded. They sealed the site, filled what they could, let the rest stay down there. And the records? Split, moved, misfiled, classified under different projects. You don't erase something like that completely. He gave a small, bitter exhale. You just make sure no one can see the whole picture. Gideon thought of the map, the word, Cerberus. Milton's eyes flicked to him again. You said your name was Rourke. Gideon stilled slightly. Yeah. The old man leaned forward. Rourke, he repeated, quieter now. Something passed across his face. Recognition, or something close to it. Then it was gone. He leaned back again, shaking his head faintly. Doesn't matter, he muttered. Gideon noticed, but he didn't press. Not yet. Milton pushed the storage tube back across the desk. You should take that, he said. Gideon picked it up. Why tell me any of this? He asked. Milton looked at him for a long moment. Because you're not the kind of man who would have brought it here if you were planning to forget it. Gideon didn't argue. The old man nodded slightly. Then, as Gideon turned to leave, Milton spoke again. If the dog found the steel... Gideon paused. Milton's voice lowered. It'll find the bones. Gideon stood still for a moment. Then he gave a small nod and stepped outside. Across the street, Vex was already watching him through the truck window. The dog's ears lifted slightly as Gideon approached. Not excited, not anxious, just aware. Gideon opened the door. Vex stepped out, landing softly on the ground. For a brief moment, man and dog stood side by side, both looking toward the road that led back into the forest. The trees waited. The same as before, unchanged. But now, Gideon knew what lay beneath them. He rested a hand briefly against Vex's harness. All right, he said quietly. Let's go see what else is down there. The wind moved through the town, carrying the scent of pine from the forest's edge. And somewhere beyond that line of trees, something long buried was no longer completely forgotten. The road back into the forest felt shorter. Not because the distance had changed, but because Gideon Rourke now carried something heavier than before. The storage tube rested on the passenger seat beside him, dull metal catching fragments of sunlight as the truck moved through shifting shadows. Vex sat upright, silent, watching the road ahead with the same focused stillness he had shown since the moment they left the clearing. Neither of them relaxed. Not anymore. The town of Briar Glen faded behind them, swallowed again by tall pines and quiet hills. Civilization here was never meant to last. It only existed where the forest allowed it. Gideon drove for several miles before slowing near another building, smaller than Milton's office, but more structured, more official. A wooden sign stood near the entrance. U.S. Forest Service, Briar Glen Ranger Station. He turned off the engine. This is the part where we ask better questions, he said quietly. Vex didn't move, but his ears lifted slightly. Inside, the ranger station carried a different kind of silence. Not forgotten, maintained. The air smelled faintly of coffee and pine cleaner. Maps covered the walls. Not decorative like Milton's, but practical, updated, layered, annotated with markers and notes. Radios sat on a desk near the window, occasionally crackling with distant voices. Behind that desk stood a woman. She looked up as Gideon entered, her eyes immediately scanning, not nervously, but with practiced awareness. Elena Wren. She was in her mid-30s, tall and lean, built from years of walking uneven ground, rather than training in controlled environments. Her posture was straight, balanced, as if she understood how to stand in a place where the earth itself could shift beneath her. Her hair, chestnut brown, was pulled into a loose tie at the back, a few strands escaping to frame her face. Light freckles dusted her cheeks, barely visible unless you looked closely. Her eyes were green, sharp, not soft curiosity, focused observation. She wore a moss-green ranger parka, sleeves pushed slightly up, revealing forearms marked faintly by old scratches and sun exposure. Her boots were worn, but well-maintained, the kind used by someone who trusted their footing more than luck. Her gaze flicked briefly toward Vex. "Beautiful dog," she said. Her voice was calm, steady, someone used to speaking in quiet places. Gideon nodded once. "K9. Her eyebrow lifted slightly. "Used to be?" "Always is," Gideon replied. Elena studied the dog a moment longer, then returned her attention to Gideon. "What can I help you with?" Gideon didn't answer immediately. Instead, he placed the metal storage tube on the desk. Elena's eyes moved to it, narrowing just slightly. Not recognition, but interest. "Found something in the forest," he said. That was enough. She stepped closer, unscrewing the cap without hesitation, pulling out the papers, and spreading them across the desk. The moment she saw the map, her posture changed. Subtle, but real. "This isn't recreational mapping," she said. Gideon remained still. "No." Her fingers traced the grid lines, the faded coordinates. She moved quickly now, flipping the paper, scanning the margins. "Where did you get this?" "North Ridge," Gideon said. "Past the creek lines." Elena didn't look up. "Rough distance?" 15 miles. She nodded slowly, already turning toward the wall maps. "Give me a second." She moved with efficiency, pulling down a large rolled chart from a rack and spreading it across a nearby table. It was newer. Clean lines, updated terrain data. She compared the two maps side by side. Gideon watched her. Vex lay down near the door, but his eyes never left the room. Minutes passed. Elena's brow furrowed. "That's not right," she murmured. Gideon stepped closer. "What?" She tapped the older map. "This section here. Then the newer one. It's gone." Gideon followed her finger. On the older map, a faint boundary marked an area, irregular but clearly defined. On the newer one, nothing. Just forest. No marking, no designation, no history. "They erased it," Gideon said quietly. Elena nodded. "Or reclassified it so deeply it doesn't exist anymore." She moved to a metal cabinet along the wall, pulling open drawers filled with folders and documents. Her hands moved quickly, flipping through years of records. "This station's been here a long time," she said. "Sometimes things get filed wrong, or not at all." She paused, then pulled out a thin folder, older, almost empty. She opened it. Inside was a single sheet, typed, yellowed. Elena read silently at first, then aloud. "Cerberus Annex. Sealed following structural collapse during weapons test operation." She looked up. Her eyes met Gideon's. "Cerberus." The words settled between them. Gideon didn't react outwardly, but something inside him tightened. Vex stood. No command, no warning. He walked across the room, slow and deliberate, until he reached the table where the maps lay. Elena froze. The dog lowered his head, inhaled once, then placed one paw directly on the older map, not randomly, not shifting, exactly, on the faded boundary that no longer existed. Elena blinked. That's, she whispered. Gideon didn't speak, because the spot Vex had chosen was the same place Gideon had been standing when he first touched the buried steel. The dog lifted his head, looked at Gideon, and for a moment, it felt less like a coincidence and more like a memory. Elena leaned back slowly. That's not normal. Gideon's voice was quiet. No. She studied the map again, then the dog. You said you found something there. A machine? She exhaled softly. What kind? Gideon hesitated, then answered. Big. Elena gave a faint, humorless smile. That's not a reassuring answer. She folded the document carefully. If this was a testing zone, she said, thinking aloud, then whatever you found wasn't abandoned. Gideon finished the thought. It was left. Elena nodded. Or sealed. She turned away from the table, pacing once across the room, not nervous, processing. There was a case, she said after a moment. Gideon looked at her. Years ago, before I transferred here. A missing person search. Solo hiker, experienced. No signs of struggle. No tracks after a certain point. Her eyes drifted briefly, not to the present, but to something remembered. We searched for days, dogs, teams, nothing. Gideon listened. He disappeared somewhere near that boundary, she said quietly. Or what used to be one. Silence settled. Not uncomfortable, just heavy. Elena looked back at him. If there's something buried out there, she said, it might not just be old metal. Gideon thought of Milton's words, steel, bones. He nodded once. Elena straightened slightly. I'm coming with you. It wasn't a question. Gideon studied her for a moment. You sure? She met his gaze evenly. I don't like holes in maps, she said, and I don't like places where people disappear without answers. That was enough. Gideon picked up the storage tube. All right. The forest welcomed them back without ceremony. The same trees, the same light, the same quiet. But now, there were 3 of them walking into it. Gideon moved ahead, steady, controlled. Elena followed slightly behind, her steps sure, her eyes constantly scanning the terrain. Vex moved between them at times, then ahead, then back again, never wandering, always aware of both. The clearing appeared as it had before, the creek, the mound, the exposed steel. Elena stopped when she saw it. For a moment she didn't speak. She walked slowly toward the partially uncovered structure, crouching near the edge where Gideon had dug. Her hand brushed the rusted surface. Jesus, she whispered. Yeah, Gideon said. That's not standard issue, she added, studying the curvature. No. She stood, looking around the clearing. If this was part of a test, she said slowly, then there should be more. Gideon glanced at Vex. The dog had already begun moving again, nose low, searching. The sun dipped lower, casting longer shadows across the clearing. The creek caught the light, turning gold again. And for the first time since they had arrived, the place didn't feel peaceful. It felt like it was waiting. That night, they built a small fire. Not for warmth, for presence. The flames flickered between them, casting shifting light across their faces. The forest beyond remained dark, quiet, endless. Gideon sat with his back against a tree. Elena across from him, knees drawn slightly in, arms resting loosely. Vex lay between them, not asleep, never fully. You don't stay anywhere long, Elena said after a while. Gideon didn't look at her. No. Why? He considered the question, then shrugged slightly. Some places catch up with you if you stay too long. Elena nodded slowly. I think the forest does the opposite, she said. He glanced at her. It holds things, she continued. Keeps them, even when people try to forget. She looked toward the trees. The forest remembers what people try to forget. The fire cracked softly. Gideon looked down at the ground, then toward the dark outline of the mound beyond the firelight. Maybe she was right. Or maybe the forest didn't remember. Maybe it just waited. And when the right people came along, it gave everything back. He rested his hand briefly on Vex's back. The dog didn't move, didn't need to. The night deepened. The creek continued to flow, and somewhere beneath the roots and soil, something long buried was no longer alone. The forest did not warn them. It did not grow darker. It did not fall silent. The creek still moved with the same gentle rhythm. Sunlight still broke through the tall pines in quiet gold. Everything remained as it had been, except for the understanding that now lived between the three of them. Gideon Rourke stood near the exposed steel, arms loosely at his sides, watching Vex. The dog was working again. Not circling this time, not uncertain, focused. His nose traced a slow path along the edge of the clearing, moving beyond the visible structure of the buried machine. He paused near the rear, inhaled deeply, then shifted slightly to the right. A few steps, another pause, another breath. Then he stopped. His body didn't stiffen in alarm. It settled, as if something had just aligned. Gideon saw it immediately. That's different, he said quietly. Elena Wren stepped closer, boots pressing softly into the pine needles. Her eyes followed Vex's posture, not just where he stood, but how. He's sure, she said. Gideon nodded once. Yeah. Vex lowered his head and began to scratch, not aggressively, not frantic, measured, each movement deliberate, as if he understood that whatever lay beneath required precision, not force. Gideon grabbed the shovel. Let's see it. The soil here resisted differently, denser, compacted in layers that didn't belong to natural settling. Gideon drove the shovel down, feeling the resistance travel up through the handle into his arms. This wasn't decades of untouched earth. This had been pressed, deliberately. Elena knelt beside him, brushing away loosened dirt with her hands. Her movements were quick but controlled, careful not to disturb anything beneath more than necessary. How deep do you think? She asked. Gideon didn't answer right away. He didn't guess. He listened, to the ground, to the resistance, to the faint changes in texture beneath the blade. Not far, he said finally. Whoever sealed it wanted it covered, not lost. A few more minutes, then the shovel struck metal. A hollow, flat sound, different from the thick armor they had uncovered before. Gideon stopped immediately. Elena leaned in. They cleared the dirt by hand now, exposing the edges of a rectangular shape. Rusted, but intact. The outline became clearer as the soil fell away. A door. About 3 feet wide. Heavy steel. Partially embedded into the earth, its surface scarred but not broken. Elena exhaled slowly. Tell me that's not an access hatch. Gideon ran his hand along the edge. The metal was cold, even in the sunlight. It is. The words didn't carry surprise, only confirmation. Vex stepped back slightly, giving them space, but his eyes remained fixed on the hatch. His ears tilted forward, not in warning, but in attention, waiting. Gideon wedged the shovel beneath the edge. It didn't move. He shifted his grip, applying more force. The metal resisted at first, then gave a fraction of an inch with a low, grinding sound. Elena reached in, helping. Together, they lifted. The hatch broke free with a sound that echoed deeper than it should have, as if the earth itself had held it shut for too long. A gap opened, darkness below, then air, cold, dry, not the damp scent of soil, but something older, oil, concrete, metal that had not moved in decades. Elena leaned slightly closer, inhaling carefully. "That's not natural," she said. Gideon nodded. "No." He reached into his pack, pulling out a flashlight. The beam cut into the darkness, revealing the top of a metal ladder descending into a narrow shaft. 15 feet down, maybe more. The walls were reinforced. This wasn't a cavity. It was built. Gideon didn't hesitate. He swung his legs over the edge and began to descend, boots finding the rungs with practiced ease. The metal creaked slightly under his weight, but held. Vex followed. Not after. Not waiting. Directly behind him. Elena came last, closing the distance between them and the surface. The temperature dropped immediately. The deeper they went, the more the air changed. Still. Stale, untouched. When Gideon's boots hit the ground, the sound echoed softly along the corridor ahead. Concrete walls, narrow, functional. His flashlight swept across the space. Dust coated everything. Thick, undisturbed. No footprints, no signs of recent entry. Elena stepped down beside him, her own light scanning the walls. "This hasn't been opened," she said quietly. "Not in a long time," Gideon replied. Vex moved forward slowly, not rushing, not searching wildly. His head low, nose working, but his pace measured. He wasn't tracking something fresh. He was reading something old. The corridor extended ahead, lined with rusted conduits and pipes that had long since lost their purpose. Some hung loose, others remained fixed to the walls, their surfaces flaking with age. They moved carefully, every step deliberate, every sound controlled. The hallway opened into a larger room, a chamber. Metal shelves lined the walls, holding boxes, sealed, labeled, preserved beyond what the years should have allowed. A desk stood at the far end, its surface layered with dust, but otherwise untouched. Elena approached the shelves first. "Storage," she said. Gideon nodded. "Documentation." He opened one of the boxes. Inside were folders, thick, heavy, protected by plastic covers that had done their job well enough to preserve the contents. Elena picked one up, flipping it open. Diagrams, cross-sections, engineering schematics. She shook her head slightly. "This isn't just a tank," she said. Gideon glanced toward the direction of the buried machine above them. "No." Vex stopped near the desk. He didn't touch it, didn't sniff aggressively. He simply stood there, staring. Gideon followed his gaze. On the desk sat a leather-bound notebook. He picked it up carefully. The cover was worn, but intact. He opened it. The handwriting inside was precise. Military. Dates, entries, observations. He flipped through several pages quickly, scanning, then slowed, his eyes focused. Elena stepped closer. "What does it say?" Gideon read silently for a moment longer before speaking. "They knew it wasn't stable," he said. Elena frowned. "Then why run the test?" Gideon turned the page. "Command directive," he answered. "Demonstration required." Elena's jaw tightened slightly. He kept reading. "The blast exceeded predicted output." He paused. Structural collapse of underground facility. Silence filled the room. Elena leaned against the edge of the desk. "How many?" she asked quietly. Gideon didn't look up. 37. The number felt heavier down here, as if the walls had absorbed it, as if it had never left. Vex moved, not toward them, toward the far wall. The dog approached slowly, then stopped in front of a section of concrete that looked no different from the rest. He lifted his head slightly. Then, he placed his paw gently against the surface, not scratching, not digging, just touching. Gideon's flashlight followed the motion. The beam revealed something faint, a marking carved into the concrete, names worn, almost erased, but still there, row after row. Elena stepped closer, her breath catching slightly. Oh my God. This wasn't just a facility. It wasn't just a failed test. It was a place where people had been recorded and then buried. Gideon closed the notebook slowly. His eyes lingered on the wall for a moment longer. 37 names. No rank, no distinction, just names. He turned back to the desk, flipping to the final page. The handwriting changed there, less precise, more hurried. He read it aloud. Do not let them call this progress. The words hung in the air. Elena didn't speak. Vex remained still. Gideon closed the book, carefully, respectfully. Then he looked around the chamber one last time. This place wasn't abandoned, he said quietly. Elena nodded. It was sealed? Gideon glanced toward the ladder, toward the surface, toward the forest that had grown over all of this. They didn't just bury the machine, he said. They buried what it did. Elena exhaled slowly. And everyone inside it. The flashlight beams flickered slightly as they shifted. Dust moved in the air, disturbed for the first time in decades. Gideon adjusted his grip on the notebook. Then we don't leave it buried, he said. Not loudly, not dramatically, just certain. Vex turned toward the ladder, ready. The forest above waited, the same as before. But now they weren't just walking back into it. They were carrying something with them. Something that had been hidden. Something that had been forgotten. Something that had waited long enough. The forest did not feel the same when they came back up. It hadn't changed. The same trees, the same light, the same quiet creek threading through stone. But something had shifted in the way it held them. As if the ground itself had loosened its grip on silence, just enough to let the truth breathe. Gideon climbed out first, boots pressing into the earth beside the open hatch. Elena followed, brushing dust from her sleeves, her expression distant, processing, storing, trying to anchor something that refused to stay still. Vex emerged last. The German shepherd paused at the edge of the opening, lifting his head slightly, drawing in the air above ground as if comparing it to what lay below. His body relaxed, not fully, never fully, but enough to signal a difference. Above, below. Two worlds. Gideon stood still for a moment, the leather-bound notebook in his hand, the weight of it heavier than it should have been. 37 names, and one truth that hadn't fully revealed itself yet. He didn't say it out loud, but something inside him had begun to lean toward it. They didn't notice the first sign immediately. It wasn't loud. It wasn't obvious. Just a faint distortion in the quiet. The kind of silence that didn't belong to nature. Vex noticed first. His ears lifted, not sharply, not alarmed, but enough. Then his head turned, not toward the hatch, not toward the trees behind them, toward the ridge. Gideon saw it. "What is it?" Elena asked quietly. Gideon didn't answer. He didn't need to. He was already looking, and then movement. 3 figures stepped through the trees, their approach controlled, deliberate, spaced with quiet precision. Not hikers, not locals. Their posture gave them away before anything else did. They knew how to move in a place like this. And more importantly, they knew what they were walking toward. The man in front stopped several yards away. Dorian Hale, mid to late 40s, tall, composed, the kind of man who carried authority without raising his voice. His build wasn't bulky, but it was refined, controlled strength rather than raw power. His dark hair was neatly cut, touched lightly with gray at the temples, matching the calm precision in his expression. A trimmed beard outlined his jaw, deliberate, maintained. His eyes were the kind that didn't rush. They measured, calculated. Behind him stood 2 others, one younger, early 30s, shaved head, broad-shouldered, with arms marked faintly by old scars. Security, military, or both. His stance was protective, not aggressive, always slightly angled toward Dorian. The third man was older, thinner, wearing wire-framed glasses and carrying a tablet device. His posture was careful, almost fragile, but his eyes moved quickly, taking in every detail with analytical focus. Not soldiers, not civilians. Something in between. Dorian's gaze moved from Gideon to Elena, then to Vex. He paused there, just a fraction longer. "German Shepherd," he said quietly. "K9. Gideon didn't respond. Vex stepped forward, slow, deliberate, placing himself between Gideon and the 3 men, not barking, not lunging, just present. Dorian stopped. A small smile touched his lips, not amused, not dismissive, appreciative. "Good," he said. "That means you understand things before they happen." Gideon's voice was calm. "Depends what's about to happen." Dorian's eyes flicked briefly toward the open hatch behind them. "You've already been inside?" Not a question. Gideon didn't answer. That was enough. Dorian clasped his hands loosely behind his back, taking one slow step forward. "Then we're past introductions." Elena crossed her arms. "Maybe not," she said. "You are?" Dorian reached into his coat, pulling out a small black card. He held it up briefly. Black Aegis Dynamics. Elena's expression tightened slightly. "Private defense contractor," she said. Dorian tilted his head. "Something like that." The older man with the tablet stepped forward slightly, his voice soft, carrying a faint European accent. "The Cerberus system was ahead of its time," he said. "Remarkably so." Elena's eyes sharpened. "It killed 37 people." The man adjusted his glasses. "Yes." Dorian didn't interrupt. Instead, he looked back at Gideon. "History belongs to those who use it." The words landed clean, practiced. Not the first time he had said them. Gideon's jaw shifted slightly. "Or the ones who survive it," he replied. Dorian smiled faintly. "Survival is one form of authorship." Gideon climbed onto the exposed turret without another word. The metal groaned softly beneath his boots as he reached the hatch, prying it open again with controlled force. Dust lifted into the air, catching the sunlight. Elena watched from below. Vex remained between her and the others, always aware. Gideon lowered himself into the turret, flashlight cutting through the darkness once more. The interior remained as it had been, frozen in time, untouched. He moved toward the central console, The data module sat where he had seen it before, encased, protected, waiting. He unscrewed the casing slowly, lifting it free. Inside, a compact unit, and beneath it, paper. He pulled the module out first, holding it in his hands. Solid, heavy, purpose-built. Then he slid the inner compartment open. A folded document emerged, old, preserved. He unfolded it carefully, rows of names, typed, organized, not a report, a list. Gideon's eyes moved across it slowly, not searching, just reading, until they stopped. The world didn't shift. It narrowed. Everything else, the forest, the voices below, the light, faded just enough to make space for one name: Elias Rourke. Gideon didn't speak, didn't move. For a moment, he wasn't in the forest. He was somewhere else, a folded flag, a quiet voice, a story that had never been fully told. Below, no one said anything. Above, Vex climbed up beside him. The dog didn't look at the paper. He looked at Gideon, then gently placed his head against the man's hand. Not asking, not reacting, just there. And for the first time since this began, Gideon didn't hide the weight. He sat down, right there on the edge of the turret, the document still in his hand. Elena saw it in his posture. Something had changed. "What is it?" she asked softly. Gideon didn't answer right away. Then, "My father," he said. Elena's breath caught slightly. "What?" Gideon lowered the paper just enough for her to see. Elias Rourke. The name sat among the others. No distinction, no explanation. Just another entry in a list that had been buried. Elena looked back at him. Understanding settled in. "That's why Milton reacted," she said quietly. Gideon nodded once. Memories moved through him, not clearly, not fully, but enough. A childhood shaped by absence, a story told in fragments, a death explained without details. Now, there were details, and they were buried in concrete. Dorian's voice broke the silence. "Personal connections," he said. "They tend to complicate decisions." Gideon looked down at him. The man hadn't moved, hadn't pressed. He was waiting. "Give me the module," Dorian said calmly. "We'll handle the rest." Gideon's grip tightened slightly. "The rest?" Elena repeated. "You mean bury it again?" Dorian's expression didn't change. "I mean ensure it serves a purpose." "Like it did before?" she shot back. Dorian didn't respond to her. His eyes remained on Gideon. "History belongs to those who use it," he repeated. Gideon looked down at the module in his hand, then at the list, then at the forest beyond. Technology, progress, strategy, all the words that had justified things like this before. And beneath them, 37 names. He slid the document back into the compartment, closed it, carefully, then stood. Elena watched him closely. Vex stepped back slightly, giving him space. Dorian took one step forward. "Mr. Rourke," Gideon cut him off. "No." The word wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. Dorian stopped. For the first time, his expression shifted. Just slightly. Not anger. Not frustration. Recognition. He nodded once. "As expected," he said quietly. Gideon climbed down from the turret, the module still in his hand. The forest around them held its breath again. Not waiting, not watching, listening. Because this wasn't just about what had been buried. It was about what would be done with it now. No one moved for several seconds after Gideon said no. The word did not echo, yet it settled over the clearing with more force than if he had shouted it. The late light filtering through the pines had begun to thin, turning gold into amber, amber into something colder. Behind them, the open hatch breathed up its stale air from the buried annex. Before them stood Dorian Hale and his two men, still composed, still measured, but no longer pretending this was only a professional conversation. Vex stepped forward until his body formed a living line between Gideon and Dorian. The German shepherd's black and tan coat caught the last low sunlight along the ridge of his back. His stance was balanced, not aggressive, but fully committed. His ears were forward. His amber eyes did not leave Dorian's face. There was no growl at first. That made the silence worse. Vex did not posture for effect. He stood like a verdict. Dorian's younger security man shifted his weight. It was slight, almost invisible. But Gideon saw it. So did Vex. A low vibration finally rose from the dog's chest, more felt than heard. Dorian lifted one hand without turning his head. The younger man stopped. "That's wise," Dorian said quietly, studying Vex with something close to respect. A good dog knows when a line matters. Gideon held the data module in one hand, the compartment with the list of names now sealed again. His face had settled into the stillness Elena had begun to recognize as the dangerous kind. The kind that came when emotion was no longer scattered, but focused. "Elena," he said, without looking at her, "if this goes wrong, you take the notebook, the folders, the names, and you go." Elena Wren's grip tightened around the leather notebook. She stood near the hatch with her shoulders squared, the moss-green parka dusty at the sleeves, chestnut hair loosened by the day until strands framed her freckled face. Her green eyes were fixed on Dorian, sharp and unwavering. "I'm not leaving you here." That wasn't a request. She looked at him for one beat too long, then gave the smallest nod. Not surrender. Trust. Dorian noticed everything. Men like him always did. "You really believe exposure changes anything?" he asked. His voice remained calm, but there was a steel edge beneath it now. "The world doesn't become moral because frightened people publish old tragedies. It becomes vulnerable." "The world was already vulnerable," Elena said. 37 people proved that. Dorian exhaled, almost weary. And 37 dead people also proved the design worked. That landed hard. Even the forest seemed to recoil from the sentence. Gideon looked at him differently after that. Not with anger first, but with recognition. He had met this kind of man before in different uniforms, in different countries. Men who could turn loss into mathematics if it preserved the machine they believed in. Men who did not lack conscience entirely. They had simply taught it to serve ambition. "You keep saying history belongs to those who use it," Gideon said. "That's not history. That's ownership." Dorian's expression did not break. Ownership is what keeps weaker men from wasting hard truths. Gideon glanced once at the module in his hand. The weight of his father's name had not lessened. If anything, it had become steadier, less like a blow, more like a direction. He crouched beside the exposed turret. Instantly, Dorian's thinner technical man stepped forward half a pace. He was older, narrow-faced, with pale skin and neatly combed gray hair behind his ears. His glasses reflected the dying light. He had the careful, brittle manner of someone more comfortable around theories than grief. "Be careful with that," he said. "The telemetry core may still be intact." Gideon looked up. Maybe? The man hesitated. The shielding was advanced for its time. Ceramic insulation, shock-mounted cradle. If moisture never breached the interior casing, Dorian cut in. Dr. Soren Kappel is telling you it may still be valuable. Soren Kappel. The name fit him. Elegant, clinical, drained of warmth. He swallowed once and adjusted his glasses. Historically valuable, he said. But even he did not sound convinced by his own correction. Gideon set the main module on the steel edge of the turret and unscrewed the secondary plate on its back. He moved slowly, deliberately, with the patient economy of a man who had disarmed too many things in his life to ever rush the hands. Elena understood what he was doing before Dorian did. "Gideon," she said softly. His eyes flicked to hers once. That was enough. When the plate came free, a smaller cartridge sat inside. A narrow core encased in aged alloy, no larger than a thick marker, dull gray with faded seals along its edge. Soren took an involuntary breath. There. Dorian's eyes sharpened. That's the part we want. I know, Gideon said. He held the cartridge up between thumb and forefinger. In the silence, the creek murmured behind them, as if the whole clearing had narrowed around this one small object. Then Vex did something strange. The dog, still standing between the men, turned his head, not toward Dorian, not toward Gideon, but toward the water. His ears shifted. His expression changed. It wasn't alarm. It wasn't distraction. It was the look of an animal listening to something distant and certain, something beneath ordinary sound. For one brief, suspended moment, Gideon saw the scene as if from outside himself. The dog standing guard, the creek moving through the stones, his father's name folded inside a dead machine, and this small metal core held above all of it like a choice too sharp to touch. It came to him then, not as a voice, not as some miracle he would have mocked in any other life, but as a kind of inner alignment. Not everything built to survive deserves to survive. Vex turned back to him, and in the dog's steady gaze there was no instruction, no mystery, only the same unwavering presence that had once stopped him from stepping onto buried explosives in another land. Some bonds did not speak. They corrected. The moment passed, but the clarity stayed. Dorian took a step closer. "Mr. Rourke," he said, and now the warning was visible beneath his composure. "Don't make a sentimental decision over a technological archive." Gideon looked at the cartridge. "This killed my father." Dorian answered without flinching. "No. Bad command killed your father. This is what remains. Learn the difference." Elena stared at Dorian in disbelief. "You really believe that makes you sound reasonable?" "It makes me sound accurate." "History belongs to those who use it," Gideon said, repeating the phrase back to him. "That's your religion, isn't it?" Dorian's gaze hardened just a fraction. "It's reality." Gideon nodded once, as if accepting the statement for what it was. Then, with one clean motion, he brought the cartridge down against the jagged inner rim of the open hatch housing. The metal cracked. Not exploded, not dramatically, just a hard, final break. Soren Kappel made a raw sound behind Dorian, more grief than anger. The younger security man took a step forward. Vex's growl erupted fully now, deep and immediate, and the man stopped like he had walked into a wall. Gideon struck the cartridge once more. The internal lattice shattered. Tiny fragments of brittle circuitry spilled into the dirt and rust dust at his boots. Dorian went very still. For the first time since he had arrived, his calm no longer looked like control. It looked like effort. "You have no idea what you destroyed," he said. Gideon dropped the broken shell at his feet. "I know exactly what I destroyed." He picked up the paper archive and handed the module casing, now emptied of its reusable core, to Elena. "This still proves what it was," he said. "That's enough." Elena took it. Her throat worked once before she spoke. "It's more than enough." Dorian looked from the shattered fragments to the notebook in Elena's hands, and something cold and practical returned to his face. "You think publishing this changes the outcome? Governments bury worse things every decade." "Maybe," Elena said. "But families don't stop being families just because files get hidden." Gideon watched Dorian carefully. "You tracked Milton." Dorian did not deny it. "He was an old loose end. Then your ranger station query lit up an archival flag. After that, you did the hard part for us." Elena's jaw tightened. So that was how. Not magic, not coincidence, systems, watch lists. Old ghosts wired into modern screens. "You should be grateful," Dorian said quietly. "Without people like us, most truths rot uselessly underground." Milton's voice came from the tree line before anyone saw him. "Then maybe they deserve to rot." Everyone turned. The old engineer stood with a trembling hand wrapped around the open door of his battered truck parked beyond the first pines. He looked thinner than before, smaller somehow, but there was a terrible steadiness in him now. His brown knit jacket hung loose over his narrow frame. His white hair caught the wind. He had driven himself here, alone, and whatever fear had ruled him for 60 years had plainly not survived the trip. Dorian's eyes narrowed. "Mr. Voss, you shouldn't be here." Milton walked closer, each step careful but resolute. "No," he said, voice rough. "I should have been here a long time ago." He looked at Gideon, then at Elena, then at the open hatch. "I signed part of the suppression packet. I helped misfile the annex records. I told myself it was national security. It was cowardice." His eyes moved to Dorian. "And I won't do it again." The clearing held him gently then, as if even the forest understood what it cost a man to tell the truth after a lifetime of silence. Dorian measured the situation and saw what Gideon saw at the same moment. The balance had shifted. No gun had been drawn. No one had thrown a punch. But the usable core was gone. The documentary evidence remained. Elena had official access and a clear motive. And now Milton Voss, living witness, signing engineer, loose end, had stepped into the light on purpose. Dorian looked almost sad. "You've chosen memory over power," he said. Gideon answered, "No. I chose the dead over men who talk like machines." That seemed to settle it. Dorian gave one short nod to his men. "We're leaving." Soren looked stricken, but obeyed. The younger man backed away first, careful not to break Vex's stare. Dorian turned before entering the trees, then paused long enough to look at Gideon one last time. "Your father still helped build it," he said. Gideon did not move. "Then I'm the one who gets to decide what survives him." Dorian left. The forest took them back without a sound. For a long time after, none of the 4 remaining people in the clearing spoke. The tension drained slowly, like dark water seeping out of stone. Elena crouched beside the hatch and began photographing everything with her phone. Then her ranger-issued camera. The names, the room, the turret, the documents, the map. Milton's statement on video. Practical things, necessary things. Truth needed a spine, not only a soul. By the time the sky had dimmed to blue-gray, the work was done. Days passed after that in a blur of statements, calls, archival transfers, and the kind of public noise that follows hidden grief when it finally finds oxygen. Elena handled the agencies. Milton signed testimony. Names were confirmed. Families were contacted. The 37 were no longer a sealed count in an annex or a rumor under trees. They were people again. And then, one quiet morning, Gideon sat by the creek. The water moved over stone with the same small music it had made on the day he arrived. Sunlight fell through the pines in pale gold. Nothing in the creek had changed. Everything in him had. Elena stood a few yards away with her hands in the pockets of her parka. "County approved a memorial marker," she said. "Nothing grand, just names. A plaque near the trail turn." Gideon nodded. "She'll remember them properly now," Elena added, glancing at the forest. He looked at Vex. The dog lay on the bank, more at ease than Gideon had seen him since the road first led them here. His eyes were half closed, but not from exhaustion. From completion. Some task the dog had never spoken, only followed, had finally ended. Gideon stood. He slung the Eberly stock pack over one shoulder and looked once more at the creek, the clearing beyond, the place where steel and silence had fought a losing war against time. Then he turned toward the truck. Not like a man fleeing, like a man leaving after answering something. Vex rose and fell into step beside him, not ahead now, but close enough that their shadows moved as one along the ground. Some truths don't come back to change the world. They come back to find the one person who needs to hear them. Sometimes, what we call coincidence is something far deeper. Something quietly guided. Something placed in our path at the exact moment we are ready to face it. A man who never stopped moving found the one place he was meant to stop. A dog who never spoke still led him to the truth. And beneath silence, time, and pain, something waited to be revealed. Maybe that is how God works. Not always in miracles that shake the world, but in small, precise moments. A step taken, a path chosen, a feeling you cannot explain, a companion who knows before you do. And in those moments, we are not lost. We are being led. In our everyday lives, we may never uncover something buried beneath the earth. But we all face truths we try to avoid, wounds we carry quietly, and choices that ask us to stand for what is right. And sometimes, the greatest courage is not in fighting the world, but in finally facing what has been waiting for us all along. If this story meant something to you, take a moment to share it with someone who might need it. Tell us in the comments where you are watching from, and what part of this story stayed with you the most. And if you believe that stories of truth, loyalty, and purpose still matter, subscribe to the channel so you do not miss the next journey. Before you go, take a quiet moment. May God watch over you and your family. May He guide your steps, protect your home, and bring peace to your heart. And wherever you are in the world tonight, may you always find the strength to follow the truth when it calls you.